My older brother fired me from our family's auto dealership with a smug grin in front of the entire staff. He didn't know that the exclusive high-profit classic cars on his lot weren't sold to the dealership. They were sold to me. My name is Tom, and I'm 42 years old. For the last 20 years, my world has been the rich scent of worn leather and high-octane fuel, the gleam of hand-polished chrome, and the deeply satisfying roar of a perfectly tuned V8 engine. Our family business, Miller & Sons Luxury Imports, was started by my grandfather with a handshake and a dream in a small two-car garage. It was passed to my father, who turned it into a local institution built on a foundation of integrity. And it was meant to be the shared legacy of me and my older brother, David. My dad was the heart of the business. He believed in relationships, in the story behind every car, and in treating every customer like a long-lost friend. David, on the other hand, saw it all as a cold, hard numbers game. He saw beautiful historic cars as depreciating assets, customers as sales funnel conversions, and passion as a non-quantifiable metric. I was the one who inherited my dad's passion. I was the soul of the place. David was just the calculator. Our dealership sold new luxury cars, and that part of the business, which David managed with a detached clinical efficiency, paid the bills. It was steady, predictable, but the margins were thin, and it had all the soul of a corporate spreadsheet. The real magic, the part of the business that made us legendary across the country, the reason collectors would fly in from California and New York, was our classic car and custom restoration division. And that was my world. I had spent 2 decades, my entire adult life, building a global network of collectors, suppliers, and grizzled old-world craftsmen who could fabricate a fender for a 1930s Bugatti from a flat sheet of metal, using techniques that were thought to be lost to time. I could find a numbers-matching 1967 Shelby GT500 in a dusty barn in rural Italy through a third cousin of a guy I'd once shared a beer with at a car show in Geneva. This division wasn't just profitable, it was the entire identity of our brand. It was built on my reputation, my handshake, my personal guarantee. My father understood this delicate balance perfectly. He saw the fire in me and the ice in David. He let David manage the new car inventory and the books, and he gave me complete autonomy over the classic division. He keeps the lights on, Tommy, my dad used to say, clapping a greasy hand on my shoulder as we stood over the exposed engine of a vintage Jaguar. But you keep the dream alive. Never forget that. The tension between David's philosophy and mine was a constant low-level hum in the background of our lives. I remember a specific incident vividly, about a year before my dad got sick. I'd spent 6 months tracking down a pristine, all-original 1963 Mercedes-Benz 230 SL for a long-time client. The profit margin on the final sale was only about 10%, not a great number on paper. David, seeing the final accounting, stormed into the garage while I was personally handing the keys over to the client's family. 10%, he hissed later, his voice dripping with disdain, just out of earshot of the client, who was still admiring his new prize. We could have sold 3 new sedans with better margins in the time you wasted chasing that relic across Europe. You're too sentimental, Tom. It's a bad business model. It's inefficient. My father overheard him from across the shop. He walked over slowly, wiping his hands on a rag, and looked at David with a tired, deeply disappointed expression. David, he said, his voice quiet, but firm enough to cut through the noise of the garage. That man you just ignored is on the board of the local hospital. His wife runs the biggest charity in the state. His son is a partner at the top law firm in the city. They don't just buy a car from us. They send their friends, their colleagues, their clients. The goodwill and sterling reputation that Tom just generated with that relic is worth more than any 3 sedans you could ever sell. You see the price of things. Tom sees the value. You do well to learn the difference before you're the one in charge. David just scowled and walked away. He never learned that lesson. He was incapable of it. 3 years ago, my dad passed away after a short, brutal fight with cancer. In his will, he left the business to both of us, 50/50ths. But he made one fateful, trusting mistake. He named David, as the elder son, the majority partner and president, giving him the final say in all business decisions. "He's better with the books, Tommy," my dad had told me, weekly from his hospital bed, his hand frail and papery in mine. "He'll do the right thing in the end. He's my son, but you just keep bringing in those beautiful cars. Protect the soul of this place for me, promise me." That conversation was the catalyst for a secret my father and I put in place in his final months. He saw the predatory gleam in David's eyes, the unchecked ambition. He knew David's greed was untempered by wisdom or loyalty. So, we devised a plan to protect my network, the true heart of the business. With my dad's full knowledge and a portion of my own savings, I created a separate legal entity, a sole proprietorship consulting firm. I called it Vintage Motor Group. It was a simple, elegant solution born of paternal worry. When I sourced a classic car, the supplier would sell the car to Vintage Motor Group. I would then, as a consultant, facilitate the sale of that car through Miller & Sons for a small, prearranged commission. The dealership was essentially just a showroom for my privately owned inventory. The paperwork was all solid, filed away by my father's own lawyer. And David, who never bothered to read the fine print on any procurement contract, just saw the massive profits rolling in and assumed it was all business as usual. He was the president, but I was the one who owned the crown jewels. For 3 years after his death, David was content to let me do my thing. He was busy playing the part of the big shot, taking long lunches at expensive restaurants, joining the local country club, and buying a fleet of expensive suits. The classic car division was bringing in over 60% of the dealership's net profit, and he was happy to spend it. But I could see the resentment simmering beneath the surface, growing hotter each year. He hated that the old money collectors, the big spenders, who would drop 7 figures on a car without blinking, would walk right past his gleaming corner office and ask the receptionist, "Is Tom in the garage?" He despised that when a major auto magazine did a feature on us, they wanted to interview me about the art of restoration, not him about his quarterly earnings. I was the face of our success, and he was just the guy who signed the checks. The breaking point, the moment his simmering resentment boiled over into open hostility, came a month ago. He called a mandatory, all-hands staff meeting in the middle of the showroom floor, right between a new convertible and a luxury SUV. He stood there, puffed up like a peacock in a new suit, looking like a man about to unveil a monument to himself. He announced a new vision for Miller & Sons. His new vision, he proclaimed, was to phase out the unpredictable, low-margin classic car division and focus entirely on high-volume, quick turnaround new car sales. He talked about leveraging digital assets and optimizing the sales funnel. It was a speech full of technical jargon that meant absolutely nothing. It was a transparent, pathetic attempt to erase the one part of the business that was still mine, the part that still held the last vestiges of our father's soul. After the speech, he called me into his office, our father's old office. He was sitting in Dad's big leather chair, a throne he had finally truly claimed. He gestured for me to close the door. "Tom," he began, steepling his fingers, the picture of a corporate executioner. "As you heard, we're moving in a new direction. Your sales approach is just too soft for the modern market. It's all handshakes and stories. We need a more aggressive, data-driven strategy. As of today, your position as head of the classic division is eliminated. The division is being dissolved. We're letting you go." I just stared at him, a cold, quiet calm settling over me. The shock I should have felt was absent, replaced by a strange sense of clarity. This moment had been inevitable for years. "You're firing me?" "That's right," he said with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Effective immediately. Don't worry, I'll have security collect your things from your office. We can't have you making a scene in front of the staff. It would be bad for morale." This was the moment he had been waiting for his entire life. The moment he could finally, officially, put his little brother in his place. He thought he was cutting off a sentimental and profitable part of the business. He thought he was taking firm, decisive control. But what he didn't know, what that fine print he never read had guaranteed, was that he was about to bring his entire kingdom crashing down around him. I didn't say a word. I didn't yell. I didn't plead. I just nodded slowly. A genuine sarcastic smile spread across my face. "Okay, David," I said, my voice even, "if that's what you think is best for the business." He looked momentarily confused, almost disappointed by my lack of a fight. My quiet compliance seemed to unnerve him far more than any argument would have. I let the two security guards, men I'd known for years, who looked deeply uncomfortable and apologetic, walk me to my office. I packed a single box with personal photos and my father's old racing trophy. As I walked out the main doors for the last time, I made one phone call. It was to Miguel, our master mechanic and restoration genius, a man who could rebuild a Ferrari engine blindfolded and had been with my father for 30 years. "Miguel," I said as I got into my car, "I'm out. David just fired me." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then a low, gravelly chuckle. "Okay, boss," he said. "Took him long enough. So, where are we setting up the new shop?" For the next week, I did nothing. I let David bask in his victory. I knew he had a massive, high-profile client coming in at the end of the week, a tech billionaire named Sterling, who had a standing order with me for a rare 1961 Aston Martin DB4. This was a $3 million sale. David had swooped in and told the client that he would be personally handling the final delivery. This was his chance to prove to the world, and to himself, that he could play in the big leagues. The email from David to my personal account arrived the following Tuesday morning. It was dripping with false, condescending professionalism. "Tom," it read, "per our records, the Aston Martin for Mr. Sterling is scheduled for final prep and delivery this Friday. Please forward me the final acquisition paperwork and the title from the original seller in Italy so we can process the title transfer and finalize the sale. Please treat this with urgency as Mr. Sterling is a very important client." I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the moment. Then, I began to type my reply. I didn't drop the bomb right away. I decided to bait the trap first. "Dear David," I wrote, "thank you for your email. I'd be happy to provide the paperwork. However, for my final accounting, could you please clarify under which corporate entity Miller & Sons acquired this vehicle? My records on this one seem to be filed a bit differently, and I want to make sure my books are clean. Best, Tom." His reply was almost instantaneous and full of bluster. "What are you talking about? It was acquired by Miller & Sons, obviously. Stop playing games and send the damn paperwork. My assistant has already scheduled the wire transfer." Now it was time. "Dear David," I wrote back, "thank you for the clarification. Unfortunately, that's where you are mistaken. Miller & Sons Luxury Imports is not, and has never been, the legal owner of that vehicle. The 1961 Aston Martin DB4, VIN number 0186R, is the sole property of my company, Vintage Motor Group, LLC. As you know, my consulting agreement with Miller & Sons was terminated last week, along with my employment. Therefore, I will be taking possession of my property immediately. I will be by this afternoon with a flatbed truck to collect the Aston Martin, as well as the 17 other classic vehicles currently held on consignment by Miller & Sons, but owned by my company. Please have them ready for transport. Regards, Tom Miller, President, Vintage Motor Group." The phone call came less than 60 seconds later. It was David, and he was screaming. A torrent of incoherent, panicked rage. "What is this? What the hell is Vintage Motor Group? You can't do this. Those are my cars. That's my sale. I'll sue you into the ground. This is illegal." "No, David," I said, my voice as calm and cool as a frozen lake. "It's perfectly legal. It's just business. You should have read the contracts. Dad always told you to read the fine print." I hung up. That afternoon, I arrived with a fleet of 4 gleaming flatbed trucks. I walked into the showroom. David stood there, his face pale and blotchy, his expensive suit looking rumpled and pathetic. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. I just nodded to him and walked back to the classic car wing. Miguel and the entire three-man restoration team, who had all quit via text message that morning, were there, waiting for me. They were all wearing new clean jackets with the Vintage Motor Group logo embroidered on them. In front of the new car sales staff and a few bewildered customers, we carefully and professionally began loading my cars. The Aston Martin, the vintage Ferraris, the classic Porsches, the entire soul of the dealership, decades of our family's history, was loaded onto those trucks and driven away. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for him. Mr. Sterling, the billionaire, was furious about the chaos and canceled the sale, vowing to never do business with the amateur hour that Miller & Sons had become. He called me an hour later to ask where my new showroom would be. Within a week, every single one of my high-net-worth clients had pulled their business. The final beautiful act of this little drama happened 2 weeks later. David, in a desperate attempt to save face, had tried to source a classic Mercedes for another client. He called one of the biggest classic car suppliers in Europe, a stern German man named Klaus, with whom I had spent years building a relationship over cigars and schnapps. After David explained what he was looking for, Klaus cut him off. Yes, Miller, the man said in his thick German accent, and I know this because Klaus called me later to laugh about it. You must be the brother. How do you say the calculator? I am sorry, but I cannot do business with you. As of last week, my exclusive North American distributor for all classic Mercedes parts and vehicles is a new company. A very impressive one. It is called Vintage Motor Group. Perhaps you have heard of it? You should call the president. I hear he is a very reasonable man. David had not only fired me, he had unknowingly made me the gatekeeper to the very inventory he needed to survive. He was locked out of his own market. Last I heard, the bank was calling in his loans, and he's being forced to sell off the new car inventory at a massive loss just to keep the lights on. He had inherited a kingdom, and in his arrogance, he had handed the keys to the one person he thought he had defeated. He tried to fire his soft little brother, not realizing he was firing the very foundation of his entire business.